Well, I wanted to thank Dr. Paul Hanstedt, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and Innovation at the University of Minnesota Rochester, for joining us today. Thank you for carving out time today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you, I always love to start out. Now, I know you've got a ton of experience in education, and I can't wait to dive in to those experiences and how they've shaped you. And one of the places I always like to start are with your mentors. You know,
Mm.
who are the mentors that helped shape your path?
Good. Excellent. Gosh, I mean, there's a lot of them, right? I think the person I'd refer to at this point, her name is Sue Ellen Duffy, and she ran the first year writing program at Ohio State University when I was a graduate student. And I was studying literature, and she was tasked with redesigning the first year writing program for, 5,000 students a year, really very big program, very prestigious program. And she had all these graduate students with backgrounds in composition and rhetoric that she could work with. But when she formed a team to do this, she actually asked me to be part of it as well, even though I didn't have any kind of background related to writing. And so I loved that. I mean, she wanted someone in the room who would slow the conversation down, who would question assumptions, who would say, wait, can you wait? Why are we doing that? What are we thinking about here? So I appreciated that about her. I also appreciated the fact that for her, there was no such thing as a tangent. Everything that came into the conversation was there for a reason, and we should listen to it. We should pay attention to it. She really paid a lot of attention to relationships, and I like to think that I carry a lot of that spirit forward into my work. I like to think I do. I don't think I do it as well as she does.
Well, I'm sure you do, and I'm sure she'd probably say the same about you. So, hey, let's talk a little bit about the Center for Learning Innovation. You know, can
Yeah,
you talk to me about what are the goals for the center, and talk to me about why you're energized about the center?
yeah. So when I'm gonna step back just a little bit and apologize.
Sure,
I hope I'm
absolutely,
not stealing any of
absolutely.
your thunder, but when the search firm for this position reached out to me, they said, this place is really different. And, I've worked with a lot of different places all over the country and, in other countries as well. And, everybody's different, right? And everybody's really proud of how different they are. So I kind of nodded politely. And then I got on the website and I was like, oh my God, these people are really, really different.
Mhm.
Um, and I can talk a bit more about some of those other features in a moment if you'd like. But one of the really distinctive features is the Center for Learning Innovation, which is our sole department. That is it. And it has biologists next to philosophers, next to experts in first year experience, next to sociologists, next to chemists, next to physicists, and so on and so forth. They are all in the department together. Um, and in addition to the fact that it's an interdisciplinary department, it's also a department that where the teaching load is designed in such a way that people are encouraged to teach collaboratively. So instead of, having for tenured faculty members like a 5 course requirement, they have a 15-point requirement, and they can get to those points any way they want. They can teach 5 3-credit courses, or they can team teach, 10 3-credit courses. And when faculty team teach, instead of it being, a 3-credit course, instead of it being 1.5 per person, it's actually like 1.8 or 1.9 per person. So the team teaching is rewarded. And then on top of that, collaborative research is rewarded. And we don't care if you're first author or third author. It's just, we prefer that you're working with other people. So we've got articles coming out with biologists and English professors writing together. And it's just amazing. I mean, the conversations we have are unlike any conversations I've ever had anywhere.
Well, and I mean, to me, that's fascinating. You know, your ability to take staff and faculty and students to all think creatively,
Yeah.
intentionally, just to keep them motivated or more motivated.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think, and this is a broad brush comment, but I think it could be easy for a long-term faculty member to kind of follow the steps and procedures that he or she have been doing for years. So
Mhm.
talk to me about how you make sure that you help with that energy.
Yeah, I'd like to think I help. So, I'm going to put it clearly, there's a question mark there. I had the advantage at my previous institution of working on a mid-career or a grant that allowed us to focus on mid-career faculty. So people in that 10 to 18 year range. And I worked with some wonderful people, Linda Boland from University of Richmond, Diane Boyd from Ferrum, Nancy Chick, who's now she was in Florida, now she's in Texas, and Katie Troyer, who's at Trinity University. Um, and I mentioned that work because it was really about sort of the melees, this moment you've gotten tenure, you're enjoying your career. You look back and there's 14 years behind you and like that was fun. And then you look up and you're like, oh geez, 20 more years, right? Um, and I mention this because UMR was founded in 2009 or matriculated our first class in 2009. And a lot of the faculty are here, have been here since 2009, which means I stepped in 2.5 years ago with a bunch of people, almost a majority of people who are in their mid-career.
Yeah.
And so there's this question of how do we keep people going? How do we keep the excitement that we had when we came into the field um, going? How do we create opportunities for people? And some of these things I don't know that I found answers for. I mean, I'm trying to create opportunities. I'm putting some money into sending people to the ISED, the International Conference of Educational Developers, which is in Barcelona this year. I've sent some folks to that. I've got sent a couple folks to Aristotle in New Zealand last November. So creating opportunities like that, creating administrative sort of opportunities, new positions, new roles. We have we have a guy who we refer to as the um, Dread Pirate Captain of Curricular High Seas. Um, HR didn't like that title, so he's called the Director of Curricular Exploration, but you get the
Yeah.
point, right?
Sure. Yeah.
We're constantly exploring new possibilities. And so part of it is creating new opportunities, but part of it is also just creating, we get into the work that we do because we find it intriguing, because there are paradoxes, there are things that don't make sense. There are questions, there are challenges, there are puzzles that we want to solve. So just creating opportunities to explore that too. And a lot of that happens, of course, in the classroom. You know, what do we find fulfilling about working with students, about helping students find their best selves? That's
Mhm.
a really long answer. I apologize for that.
Hey, I love it. It's the thought leadership that counts. I mean, my job's easy. I get to ask the questions. You're the one
Mm.
giving the thought leadership answers. So not a problem at
Yeah.
all. This is great. So if you could challenge one long-held assumption colleges make about students,
Mm.
what would that be?
Just one. Um, that we need to begin them at a level where all we're doing is dumping information into them. And that for the really challenging, exciting, problem-solving, engaged work, we have to wait until the third or the fourth year.
Yeah.
I just, I think if we want them to solve complex problems when they're seniors, that's a complicated skill, involves synthesis and evaluation and failure and recovery and all of these things. Yes, start that the first year. So I think it's the idea of introductory basic courses. You can have introductory courses, but if they're basic, if they're just content driven, content delivery,
Yeah.
and boy, and then we're shocked that students are bored, right? And related to this, I would also say this: why is it that Our biggest classes at so many universities occur in the first year. And then by the time they get to be juniors and seniors, when they're very self-motivated and they know their faculty members, those are small classes. That makes no sense to me. It should be the other way around. The
Yeah.
small classes where we can really be hands-on and get to know them and give them some personal attention, that should be happening in the first year, even if it means a lot of resources. But re invert that model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you've had a lot of experience teaching. Are you do you still spend time in the classroom today?
No, I don't. And I miss it. I really do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you may have just answered this as far as that intimate setting with the students, but what do you miss most?
Yeah. Um, I certainly, I mean, before I came to the University of Minnesota Rochester, which is a small but growing place, I was at two small liberal arts colleges, and I certainly missed being able to see a student 3 years, having a student as in my first year writing class, and then 3 years later, bumping into them on campus, and you almost don't recognize them because they just don't look the same. The
Right.
light in the
Sure.
eye, the sense of their sense of who they are has just changed. I love that. But I think the thing that really does it for me and has always really done it for me and underlies everything I do in my classes, in my writing, in my administrative work, is that moment where a student comes in and hands you something, paper, an oral presentation, an understanding of the group dynamic in the group they're working, a project that they're working on, that they just had no idea they could do. They just had no idea. And when they walk away, their shoulders are straighter. That self-discovery of their own potential is astounding. And I don't know, years ago I had somebody who said, my faculty love the sage on the stage model, and I can't get them to move away from that. Do you have any ideas? And I said, ask them what their favorite teaching moment ever was.
Hmm.
They're not going to talk about that lecture they gave. They're going to talk about that student who changed, you know.
Yeah.
So that's I appreciate that question.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And now I know that you have been you are an author.
Hmm.
You've had several essays that you've
Hmm.
written, and kind of speaking to that. You know, were there moments that when you dove into it, you thought, well, okay, well, how do you go about doing this? How do you write a book? How do you write a compelling essay?
Hmm.
And talk about those feelings, especially probably when you got out of the gate and just started doing it. And then what did you learn from those experiences?
I have a completely unfair advantage. I was in a room once where Helen Sword, who's from the University, I want to say in Auckland in New Zealand, was running a writing workshop. And there were maybe 90 people in the room. And she said, and they're all faculty. And she said, how many of us actually like writing? And three of us raised our hands, right? And so I actually like writing. I like putting words on the page. And sometimes when I'm doing that and trying to craft a better sentence or to get something that's in my head into words, it's like I've been holding my breath for 10 minutes and I finally get to let it out, right? So writing
Right.
for me
Yeah.
in that way is a different experience. But I think if I'm hearing the question you're asking, there have definitely been essays and even books that have just not made it out of the chute, you know,
Right.
or
Sure.
the
Sure.
draft is done and you get to the end and you're like, oh well, it's a nice idea, right? Um,
Sounds
but
like
I
many of
also,
the home projects. I don't know.
oh yeah, no, right, yeah,
Sounds
yeah,
like
yeah,
a
yeah,
nice
yeah.
idea, and then when you're done, you're going, "Is that how it looks?"
Actually, every once in a while with a home project, you got to keep going because now your floor is stripped,
That's right.
so
That's
there's
right.
there's no going back.
No
And
turn
with
back.
that, yeah, it's kind of a relief with the essay because you can stick it in the drawer and just not worry about it forever. I do rely on the people around me, and I'm very fortunate to have really smart friends who are also really good listeners who can say things like, "Well, what you're trying to say X, or is what you're trying to say Y, or maybe you should think about this, or." or I think you're skating along the surface here. You need to stop being afraid and dive in deep and go
Yeah.
for things that really matter. I will also admit this. My wife is the managing editor of the University of Virginia Press. So
Oh, okay.
so
A
so I
little
mean
bit
I
of
can I
advantage there.
yeah,
Okay.
no, right, completely unfair. I mean, and I will say that twice in my life. Once, and I remember where it was both times. Once I walked back into the apartment when we were in Hong Kong working on a Fulbright on general education reform, and I said X, and she goes, "That sounds like a book." And then another time when we were driving up in New York City for a weekend away, to just the two of us, and I was saying, I'm trying to reconcile X and X, and she goes, "That sounds like a book," and both of those became books. So that's
Oh,
handy having
great.
that person
That
there.
is great.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. So I
yeah,
have a question about the Fulbright year in Hong Kong, but before we jump to that,
sure,
I did want to talk about what part of your title is, which is innovation.
yeah.
And when you talk about writing, let's talk a little bit about how AI is being
Mm.
used today, and what are the positives and negatives at a higher education institution when you look at AI?
The positives are some meaningless work can be done more quickly.
Yeah.
Um, Another positive is it can give you a first draft of some more meaningful work, you know. I'm trying to think of like every once in a while I've got a task force or committee where I need to create a charge. So I can just dump that in. It'll give me something. And then I can, it's like the coin flip. You look at it and you go, no, God, no, not that, this kind of thing, right? So that those are the positives. The downside is that as an academic culture for 50 years, we've treated writing like it's purely communication.
Mm,
And that when we're teaching students writing, not writing instructors, but everybody else, not everybody else, sporadically, but just as opposed to that writing is a way that we learn, that we figure things out, that we solve things. I
yeah.
want to say, Chris Anson says, we're words are visible, writing is visible thought, the testing of ideas.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the fact that we haven't paid attention to that means that students that hasn't been communicated to students from the time that they were in first grade. The French term or the term essay comes from essai, which means to explore, to study, to travel, and and students don't know that. Um, and so writing is a task, writing is a communication task. And if this machine can do it, why should I bother? Well, because the why is if you're writing well, you're changing. It is changing not just your audience, but you and how you think about yourself and how you think about the world. The other thing I'm going to simply say is that AI lose uh, the use of AI undermines a student's ability to find their own voice and
Sure.
having a voice. And I mean both having a distinctive way of speaking and being who you are, but also having, I think, the thoughts and the exploration of ideas and knowing who you are that way. Losing that is horrific.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate those thoughts. Absolutely. Now I told you I'd go back to
Oh, sure.
The Fulbright
Sure.
year in Hong Kong, but now I know you've collaborated with universities across four continents
Sure.
to drive curricular and pedagogical reform. And so can you talk to us about, when you look at pedagogy, when you look at curriculum, when you look at teaching, take one of those three or all three, but what do you see as the key differences, when you're in Hong Kong versus America versus, University of Minnesota Rochester and other continents?
A culture, the obvious answer, right? I remember once running a workshop in Hong Kong where I was talking about some innovative ideas and some different ways of, assessing or testing student learning, in ways that were more engaging and ways that would help students um, manage process the information more productively. And somebody said, but the problem with that is, we're all teaching the same class and we all have to do it exactly the same way. So and you're going to find that in different places, different settings at different times to different degrees. So seeing a little bit of that. Um, I mean, I frankly don't. I mean, I think you can have a common. This is so you talked about pedagogy, curriculum and instruction. I would add to that learning, right?
Sure,
That you
sure.
can
Yeah,
you can have
right.
a common curriculum and you
Yeah.
can require a common pedagogy. We're all going to do it this way. We're all going to do it in an engaged way. We're all going to flip our classrooms. The learning is still going to be different. And oftentimes it's going to be a consequence of the instructor. Oftentimes it's going to be a consequence of the student. Oftentimes it's going to be a consequence of where the student's at. Oftentimes it's going to be a consequence of, the weather that day or the interaction or the fight they had with their mom before they came to class. So those features. I'm not a believer that a common curriculum is going to ensure common learning. It's a goal to aim for.
Yeah.
We're progressing towards, the perfect zero, the overlap of commonalities. But like in mathematics, you never truly get to zero. I think the other example I'm going to find sometimes too is it's interesting. I mean, as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, is it by country or by region, or is it by institution, or is it by instructor? Is it the question of sort of faith, degree of faith in students and their ability to be partners? I saw some institution recently put up a video of sort of growth mindset.
Mhm.
And they had this whole seminar series on growth mindset. And it was great. It had panels of faculty and experts talking about it, and then it brought students into the room, and then it put students in rows and they talked at them. And I just thought, oh my God, as opposed to talking with them. So I mean, part of it is this idea of earlier when you asked the question, the myth that we need to break. I think part of the core of the answer I gave is trust in students' ability to take on challenges. Um,
Yeah.
there's a students as partners movement. Um, Kathy Bothell and several other people in the UK. I really am a believer in that. What happens when you bring students into the room and you ask them the questions? And it doesn't mean you don't ask them the questions in an uninformed way. You bring some information to them and then ask them the questions
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
sort of see where that conversation goes. And it doesn't mean that they finally have the final voice because that's not the whole point of learning. But it does mean that can we ask students to develop if we don't ask them to have the risk of being a partner?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
So, general question, so you can take this probably in a number of directions, but how do you define student success?
I think I'd give two ways. One is that moment where they discover a capacity they never thought they'd have. Back in Hong Kong, I was working with walking down across campus with a guy named Gavin Brown, who's now, again, weirdly at the University of Auckland. And I was talking about these situations where you had these really brilliant people. When you're teaching writing, you have these really brilliant people who can't write. And then you have these people who are kind of average and they're amazing writers. Isn't that weird? And he just looked at me and said, Paul, to be a good writer, you need three things. You need a sense of the knowledge that you're writing about. You need a sense of the discourse practices, how people in this area and in this field write. And then you need a sense of having the right to put your words on the page. And so one answer to student success is that our students have a sense of their right to enter the conversations, whether it's a conversation on the page or a conversation in the classroom or a conversation in the boardroom, that they know they have the right to say, well, what about, or what if, or could we try? That's definitely one definition of success. And I think that's related to the example I gave earlier, a student handing you something they didn't know they could do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other idea is just simply agility, that we can train somebody to be a veterinarian and they can become an amazing, you know, CEO of a shipping logistics company, right? Or
Right.
that we train
Yeah.
somebody in rhetoric and they can become an amazing surgeon, right? That ability to sort of shift and follow paths and learn how to learn, I guess.
So where do you see the University of Minnesota Rochester in 5 years?
Huh. Interesting.
Get that crystal ball out.
Oh gosh. Well, yeah, no. Well, I mean, this has been on our mind. So I don't know. I'm going to brag a little bit here. Our first year enrollment last year, so the incoming class of 25 was an 80% jump over the incoming class of
Wow.
24.
Yeah, that's a huge jump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that got some attention. And this year's enrollment seems to show the same thing. So this is a very real question for us. We're shifting from a university of about 1,000, and within 5 years, we'll probably, hopefully, maybe with some graduate programs, be a university of 2,500, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000. So that is part of what we're doing. Um, and we did that, by the way, we did not lower standards at all.
Mhm.
If
Right.
anything, this year
Yeah.
we're getting a little bit fussier with who
Yeah.
we pick. Um, that's part of it. The other part of it, we grow, we bring in more students. Um, the other part of it goes to one of those other distinctive features of UMR that I didn't talk about earlier when I was saying how different the place is. The scholarship of teaching and learning is the primary form of research for all of our faculty.
Mm.
Okay, so we've got biologists, and they're not looking at cancer cell development, or chemists who are looking at this particular kind of plastic, or English professors who are looking at you know mid-career Charles Dickens navel gazing. It's everybody, regardless of their field, is looking at how students learn.
Yeah.
And there's a couple consequences for that, or benefits to that. One benefit is our students learn better. 2/3 of our population is underrepresented in some way or other. Students of color, Pell Grant eligible, first generation, economically, I'm just any number of features coming into play. And our students generally, not perfectly, not exactly, not every year, but generally perform at the same levels regardless of their demographic background. Our Pell eligible students perform better than our non-Pell eligible
Mm.
students. Our women perform better than our men. I mean, we've got this thing, and they all perform generally well. So we're closing all these gaps. So that's one of the benefits. The other benefit of it is that we draw faculty. People come here because you know, they were perfectly fine doing bench chemistry or bench work in chemistry or biology, but what they really wanted to do was focus on how people learn chemistry better. So we have 46 faculty, and I'm going to say 45 and a half of them are superb teachers, right? No, I'm kidding. They're all good, But I mean, it is this high ratio. 1/5 of our teachers have
Sure.
won the highest teaching. Yeah, but there's going to be one person out there going, "Wait, am I that one?"
Yeah.
Um, it our students, the highest teaching award you get at the University of Minnesota is the Morse Teaching Award, or Morse Award for Outstanding Faculty. 1/5 of our faculty have won that award. We're only 15 years old,
Yeah.
right?
Oh.
And I've got a colleague, Jake Wright, who's a philosopher, who won that award a couple years ago. And he goes, "I love that I won that award." He goes, and then I look around the room and I realize everybody else could win that award as well. So that's extraordinary. And I think that's a
Yeah.
message. Here's where I'm going with this. The other area we want to go is to start to broadcast to other institutions how you can do this, that having that focus on teaching and learning is going to draw people into your institution who are going to be better teachers, who are going to change the tone of the conversation, it's going to lead to greater student learning. It's the Education as a public good is served in that way.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm very deeply appreciative of people who research cancer, with huge grants and never step into the classroom at some land grant university. Love that. We know that's crucial, but we also need people who step into the classroom and
Sure.
make it a powerful experience. So that's the other thing is it's just how do we broadcast this? And I've mentioned going to national and international conferences, but we also are we're running teaching academies and bringing folks in and training folks up and working with a couple of different corporations and stuff like that. So sort of spreading the word on how good teaching can happen.
Well, I love that. And hopefully, this podcast will help be a vehicle to broadcast the message about the University of Minnesota Rochester and just how different and unique in a special way
Yeah,
it is. So, Dr. Paul Hanstedt, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
my pleasure. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.